As you can imagine, that video that you just saw there was shot on a drone and a ground camera, in this case a Mavic 2 Pro and a Panasonic GH5. Two fantastic, capable cameras, but they produce different results, so we have to match that footage in post, and we're going to take you through our 8 tips for doing so. Now, I'm making an assumption here that you know how to use your cameras to a kind of basic but still competent level. If you're still getting up to speed in the basics, do check out our other content on this channel or our 8-hour drone cinematography masterclass, where we take you from drone owner to drone pilot to drone cinematographer in a cinematic and enjoyable and informative way. Link in the description below with discount code embedded. Right, let's crack on with the 8 tips. There's a general principle underpinning this entire video which goes as follows. Where possible, get things right in camera. Yes, you can use post-production, but think of post-production as a gloss or the icing on the cake. You're refining an already good piece of footage. Don't rely on it as a crutch to fix your mistakes or inadequacies in your filmmaking skill. So with that in mind, let's talk about the first tip. Maintain a constant shooting environment. If you've done your drone shots in the glorious midday sun, then you're probably going to want to shoot your ground footage in the glorious midday sun, certainly if you're looking for consistency, at least. If you do your ground footage when it's overcast and the cloud is just shot across the sun, you're going to have a different white balance, the look is going to be different, and you're going to struggle to match things. Of course, there's a certain practicality to that, because as drone filmmakers, we can't control the sun and we can't control the clouds. So I am very, very mindful of that and have lots of experience of having to work within the constraints that we're presented with. But nonetheless, where possible, maintain a constant shooting environment. Second up, set a correct exposure. If you've seen our other YouTube video on how to use the DJI Go app's histogram to set a correct exposure with your drone footage, then exactly the same principles apply with your ground camera work. I'm sure even the cheaper point-and-shoot cameras will have an option of bringing up a histogram. You need an objective measure of exposure so that you're not relying on your eye, the brightness of the screen, the reflections coming from the sky to mislead you when you're setting your exposure. You'll save yourself a whole lot of heartache if you bring in well-balanced, correctly exposed footage from both your cameras. Tip number 3, set a manual exposure. Now, it's tempting, especially in the early days, to set your camera to auto. It means you can point the camera at the sun and get a good exposure. You can point it into the shade and get a good exposure. The issue with that is twofold. First of all, in my opinion, it doesn't look professional. You don't see exposure shifts in footage in good quality TV and cinema. But the bigger issue here, since we're talking about matching cameras, is we need a level playing field for matching our footage. So if you have 2 different cameras dealing with exposure differently in auto mode, it's going to make it a whole lot harder to match that footage together. So in the interests of having a good starting point for matching, you need to set a manual exposure so the exposure does not change while shooting. Tip number 4, set a manual white balance. Same idea as setting manual exposure. We're trying to give ourselves a nice starting point for matching the 2 sets of footage. We can't afford to have 2 different cameras dealing with white balance automatically during the shots. Added to that, it looks dreadful. It doesn't look professional if you see the white balance change during a shot. You can dial in a manual Kelvin number on the DJI Go app. You can do that on probably the majority of decent cameras. If that's not an option on your camera, then set your camera to cloudy or sunny, depending on the daylight conditions. Set your drone to cloudy or sunny, and that's going to give you a pretty good match on your white balance. The most important thing, however, is that it does not change whilst shooting. Tip number 5, where possible, use similar settings on your camera and your drone. If you're in the DJI drone world, you probably know about your style settings, so contrast, saturation, sharpness, 000, -1, 00, all that kind of stuff to get the best possible picture from your drone. Take a look at the picture you're getting from your camera, take a look at the picture you're getting from your drone, and see what you can do to marry the two. You might not get an identical result, so that's where post-production comes in, but at least we get a good starting point. Tip number 6, only shoot in a log picture profile if you have a reason to. It's quite topical with DJI drones in particular because most of them give you this flat, unsaturated log picture, which promises extra dynamic range and generally speaking does give you benefits in that respect, but it adds a lot of extra work in post-production and can be quite intimidating if you're new to the process. When Alina and I shoot weddings with these Panasonic GH5s, the option is available to us to shoot on a 10-bit log profile with these cameras. If you've seen our thoughts on Mavic 2 Pro 10-bit, you'll know that we love it. I mean, there are real tangible benefits to be had from shooting a 10-bit log profile, but we don't use it when we shoot weddings. Far more beneficial to us than that little boost in dynamic range that doesn't matter anyway if you know how to film well, is the fact that we don't have to spend hours colour grading log footage just to get us back to the same starting point we would have had if we just shot on a standard picture profile in the first place. So unless you're using a drone like the Mavic 2 Pro, which really does bring benefits using that 10-bit log profile, consider giving it a miss because you might just be giving yourself extra work and making the job of matching your two cameras even harder. Tip number 7, refine your footage in post-production. Now of course, if you followed the first 6 tips, you're going to have pretty well-matched, well-balanced footage, but post-production is there at the end of the day to help you just tweak things that little bit further. If you think about the component parts of the image that we've already discussed, exposure, contrast, saturation, sharpness, white balance, all of those things can be tweaked in post. If you are shooting a log profile on your drone but not on your camera, then you're going to have to stretch out your contrast and add back your saturation in post. I won't get into that here because we've got a video on that already, so do check that out if that matters to you. Tip number 8, colour grade your footage. If you followed the first 7 steps, you're going to have nice balanced footage to which you can then apply your colour grade. You can do that with LUTs. We have a drone film grade LUT pack actually, which is applicable to drone footage and ground camera footage, in fact footage from any camera, so do check that out in the link in the description below. You can also just put a simple colour grade on yourself. Either way, I think it ties it all together and can make things look a little bit more unified. Another thing we like to do is put a 2:35:1 aspect ratio, the letterbox, if you will. Again, I think that pulls things together, and also put a vignette on things. It just adds a little bit center focus to the image. It pulls it all together. Don't overdo it because it looks amateurish, but a combination of those 3 things definitely just helps bring your project together right at the end. Okay folks, I hope you learned something in this week's episode. We will of course be back next week with another video here on Drone Film Guide. In the meantime, don't forget to check out our Instagram page. We've got a nice thing going on there. Also check out the links to our premium products, the Drone Cinematography Masterclass and our drone film grades. Until next time, happy flying.